Cipher user screen allows one to see all the users that have access to your Cipher account. When first starting up Cipher, you will need to add users yourself, and by doing that, you just press the plus button in the lower right-hand corner. Here you will need to type in your user's email address. This is the email address they will use to log in at the login screen. Their first name and last name, and if they belong to a pre-made tenant, you can select what tenant you want them to belong to, so when they log in for the first time, they're already part of that tenant. For more information on tenants, please view the tenant video. Below the user information, we have the roles. Roles allow users different access to different tools within Cipher. To select which role does what, you can use the Help button in Cipher and go to the Help screen. Under the Users and User Profile, there is a section for roles. Here is a list of all of the roles that you have available and what they do. Now, roles are a la carte, meaning just because I pick a higher role does not mean that the lower roles are included with them. If I want the tools available for the administrator role, and I want the tools available for the editor role, I need to select both the administrator and editor. They are not included with a higher role. So going back to the roles, to add a role, you simply just click on it and it will move it to the right side. If you decide you do not want them to have those tools or that access, you simply click it on the selected role side and it will put it back over to the available side. Once all the information is filled in, you hit create. It will create the users in the main user screen. For the very first time setting up a user, they will get an email, which that user will need to go to their email address that they used to have you set up their account, and in there will be a link. When they press that link, it will take them to a web page, and they will need to copy the provided password, the provided temporary password that's in the email. They'll need to copy it from that email that's sent out to them and paste it into the login screen. At that point, it will then move them over to where they can pick an email of their choice, something easier for them to remember, and then that will be the email, or I'm sorry, that will be the password they will use along with their email address to log into the website. Once the user has their user card on the main screen, you can change the tenant from this front area if needed. Also, you have the ability to reset the password from here. So if you are an administrator user and you have access to all the user accounts and you have a user that's having issues logging in, you can click on this button and it will then send a new email out to that user's email address, in which case they would then go back to that email, click on the link, type in the default temporary password that will be on that email. And then they'll have to copy and paste that in, just like they did the very first time setting up their account. On the card, you can see they have their address, their email address, the last time they logged in, if the account is still active, and what roles they have. You can use the filter at the top to find any particular user you want to log in with. In the lower right-hand corner of the user card, if you click on that, that does go to the profile, in which case here, you can make some adjustments. As far as the first and last name, you are unable to change the email address. All accounts are tied to the email address and cannot be changed. If you mistakenly put the wrong email address into an account for the first time, you will have to make a new account with the correct email address in there, as you will not be able to edit this email address out. It is the user profile screen is where one will go in and choose to be notified via email or text messages when alarms are triggered. This is how each user notifies the system how they want to be notified. They will also need to put their phone number in here where the text message will appear. You have the option also to be notified when any new site is added. So if there is a new site being pushed into the system, and perhaps you're a manager that needs to monitor that, you can select this switch here, and then anytime a new site pushes in, depending on if you have the email notification and or the text notification, it will let you know that that site is pushed in. You also have the ability to change the tenant here. Now note that this account cannot belong to a tenant, and that is because of my role as a system administrator. System administrators cannot be part of a tenant because they have access to all tenants. Again, for more information on tenants, please see the tenant video. We do have an option to add an avatar. So if you'd like to have an avatar to your name, you can hit this choose button and go find the file and then upload that here. And then that will show, this picture will show in your name in the upper right hand corner when you log in. We already covered roles, but this is where I can go in and make changes after an account is already set up. I can simply remove certain roles if I wanted to. Just by clicking on them, they'll move them over there. Then our preferences, this is a location where your login preferences of all your login account, all your preferences that you want to have defaulted when you log in. As an example, on the pages that have lots of information, like your alarms page, or possibly you're using the sites page with the number of lines that will show on the display by default at the bottom, you don't have to have it only set to 10. If you prefer to just have it default to 50, so you have the maximum number of lines on the screen, you can do that. You can choose your date time format here as well. Your default data handling. This is for errors. When there's errors in the data, how does the software work with those errors? As an example, you get an error in your velocity. By default, we just use the existing value that's reported in. However, if it is an error, we can have those errors read to 0, repeat the last good reading it had. So if it was at 4 feet per second and then you get an error, it will just go grab the last 4 feet per second reading and carry it over. Or interpolate the data. Interpolation, when you get an error and the data is all brought into the server, anytime it sees an error, it'll look at the data reading before and the data reading after the error and come up with an interpolated value that best represents what likely happened to get from point A to point B. So again, that's a default data handling for your analysis. When you're making a graph, how those errors are displayed, this is what's going to be selected right from the get-go. You can choose to show inactive sites when you do searches. By having this checked by default, you will see inactive sites when you look for those inactive site areas under sites here. If I choose the button over here, I can see that this site is deactivated. If I had that actually checked off, get back in there, then it would never show inactive sites. Not on the map screen, not on your site screen. Nowhere would it be available to choose because it's inactive. So that's just one way of filtering out those from the get-go. All your graph defaults are here. You can choose the day of the week. When you say start of a week, what do you want that start of the week? Typically it's Sunday, we found, so we have the default set for Sunday, but perhaps Monday or maybe a Wednesday is the start of your work week. You can set that up here, so every graph that you create has already got that set in there, so you don't have to change that. Also, the relative range, when you create a graph for the first time, we had that defaulted to 24 hours. The main reason we have that for 24 hours is because that's the amount of data when you pull over your very first data set and any other data sets coming over, how much data is going to show up on that graph from default. Now, if you had a complete year in there, then obviously it might take a long time. If you had the custom, you could choose last year. The point is the more data you have set for your default, it takes longer to pull that data in from the server to bring it right onto your display. So 24 hours is the smallest amount. That's why we leave that for default. But perhaps you always need to see last 7 days for any new graph being made. Of course, all these can be changed on the fly in the graph itself. These are just defaults how you want the graph started. There's a reduce legend. This reduces the information on the legend inside the graph. This setting is actually available in each data set. You can see that information more under the analysis configure graph screen video. But in their properties of each data set, you can choose to reduce the legend. Here you can have it automatically reduced by default. Data types and units. This is basically you go through all the different data types we have available. You find it as an example level. You can choose what you want the default color of those lines to be in the graph, what you want your default units to be. If you want symbols displayed on the graph, the symbols are points that show on the graph like a dot to dot where the reading was actually taken. The line between the dots is what's being generated by the graphing software, but the dots themselves are what is the actual reading being shown. So if you want those on the graph, you can have any type of these symbols here chosen, and then you can also choose the line that draws between those dots. Do you want that to be a solid line, a dashed line, a dotted line? These become actually more useful when you have data overlapping each other, and sometimes the level of velocity might just track right on top of each other. By having it dashed or dotted allows you to see in between those dashed and dots with the solid line behind it. So that's there, but again, this is for default. When you drag something over and make your graph, do you want symbols included, and what do you want the line type to be? The symbol size, if you choose a symbol, what the size of those are, and the line width. Precision is the amount of data behind the decimal point, to the right of the decimal point. So by default, we just have it 2 digits behind the decimal point. But if you needed more, you can select up to 10 more points behind the decimal point. And finally, event symbols. When viewing a graph and you're choosing to look at events, you can choose how you want those symbols for each one of these events to look. So the data, if you go and watch the analysis graphing video, you'll notice I show that I do have the data points selected, the data alarms, and at the bottom there are little pin marks for the symbol. The default color is red. In this case, you can change that to whatever color you'd like. Otherwise, you can have different pins and different colors for each one of these different types of events. And that concludes the user screen.